My name is Thomas Grant. I was 44 the day my father and younger brother forced me out of the family company my grandfather built with his bare hands. It didn't happen with a shouting match or a slammed door. It happened in a boardroom, under the glow of recessed lighting, with legal papers already printed and signatures already dried. My name was on the exit agreement, not because I'd signed it, but because they had the board votes to push me out, and all I could do was watch it happen. Our company, Grant & Sons Heavy Logistics, had been around for nearly 70 years. Started as a trucking outfit in Missouri, hauling raw steel and timber across the Midwest. By the time I was old enough to reach the pedals, I was already riding shotgun on cross-country hauls with my dad. I grew up inside those diesel cabins. I knew every route, every way station, every supplier handshake. I wasn't just part of the business. I was the next generation. Or at least, I thought I was. The shift started slow, subtle. After my father had a minor stroke 2 years ago, I stepped up to handle the day-to-day operations. Not officially CEO, but the one making the calls. My brother Lucas, who had always been more interested in country clubs and stock options than the trucking yards, was mostly absent. Until he wasn't. Suddenly, he was showing up to meetings, offering strategic insights he got from some management podcast, talking about efficiency metrics and cost restructuring like he'd invented the wheel. I kept things professional. After all, he was family. But I didn't trust him. And I definitely didn't trust his new friend, the corporate advisor he'd brought in from Chicago, some slick-haired consultant named Devin who wore loafers to a truck yard. Then came the optimization plans, outsourcing routes, automating driver management, selling off older rigs that still had years left in them. I pushed back, not out of pride, out of principle. These weren't just assets on a ledger. These were people I knew, men who'd worked with us for decades, machines I'd rebuilt with my own hands. The tension built quietly. My father, once strong and decisive, had grown tired. He started deferring more to Lucas. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want conflict. He just wanted rest. And Lucas gave him that by saying all the right things. And then one morning, I was called into a meeting. The room was too quiet. My father sat at the head of the table, eyes downcast. Lucas stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing that smug half-smile he thought looked like confidence. "We're restructuring," Lucas said. "Devin thinks it's time for a new leadership model, more agile, more scalable." I just stared at him, then looked at my father. "Dad?" He didn't meet my eyes. "I think it's best if you take a step back," he mumbled, "for the good of the company." The documents were already there. Severance terms, NDA clauses, a clean exit. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the only world I had ever known. They thought they'd buried me that day, that I'd vanished quietly while they gutted the company for short-term gains. But what they didn't realize was that I had spent 20 years building more than just logistics routes. I had built relationships, trust, loyalty. And I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I spent the first 2 days after the meeting doing nothing but walking. No destination, no calls, no plans. Just me and the open road. I'd driven to highways 1,000 times behind a wheel, but walking them, that was different. You notice the cracks in the asphalt, the distance between markers, the way wind hits differently when there's no engine between you and the silence. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. Not my ex-wife, not the guys at the yard, not even Charlie, our lead dispatcher and my oldest friend. I needed space. Not to grieve, there wasn't time for that, but to think. Lucas and my father thought they'd ended something, but they didn't understand what I'd built over the years. I didn't just run operations. I was operations. I knew the clients by name, not account number. I'd helped half the senior drivers buy their first homes. I'd stayed up nights routing emergency shipments when storms grounded planes. That kind of loyalty doesn't vanish with a signature. So I went home, poured a glass of bourbon, and opened an old ledger. Not the company's. Mine. a black notebook I kept since I was 23. Names, routes, deals, promises kept and broken, the truth of the business, written in my own hand. By Friday, I had a plan. First, I called Charlie, told him I was out. He went quiet for a long moment. "They'll burn it to the ground without you," he finally said. "Maybe. Or maybe that's what needs to happen." He didn't argue, just asked what I needed. "Contacts," I said. "Old ones." He promised to start making calls. Next, I reached out to two of our oldest clients, a construction supplier in Tulsa and a steel plant in Kansas City. Both had expressed frustration recently about delays, price hikes, new contract language that Devin probably added without blinking. I told them I was starting something new, small, independent, reliable. They didn't even ask to see a proposal. "You got a truck?" I said. "Better. I've got drivers." And I did, because over the weekend 5 senior drivers showed up at my door. "We heard," one of them said simply. "Whatever you're doing next, we're in." They didn't ask for contracts, didn't need speeches, just looked me in the eye and knew I wasn't done yet. I leased a small lot just outside Springfield, old industrial space with a corrugated metal shed and enough room to park 8 rigs. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I bought 2 used trucks from a retiring operator in Ohio, spent 2 nights in the garage checking every hose and belt myself. No investors, no advisors, just sweat equity and a name people could trust. I called it Iron Spur Freight. Quiet, unassuming, but solid. Then I waited. Didn't reach out to Lucas, didn't confront my father, didn't even post anything on social media. I let the silence stretch. Let them think I'd vanished. Because sometimes silence is louder than shouting. Sometimes the absence of noise makes people wonder where the next storm is coming from. And when it hits, they remember the man who didn't scream when he was pushed. They remember the man who simply walked away until he didn't. 2 weeks after I opened Iron Spur Freight, I got a call from Linda, the accounts manager over at McKinley Steel in Kansas City. She sounded tense. "Tom, are you guys still available for contract work?" I paused. "Yeah, why?" She hesitated. "Because Lucas just raised our rates by 23%, no warning. And now he's saying we need to sign a new vendor agreement, one that gives them exclusive rights to handle our regional freight. That wasn't part of our last deal." That didn't sound like my brother. He was greedy, sure, but not reckless. And exclusivity clauses? Those weren't just aggressive, they were dangerous. Risky, especially for clients who'd been with us for decades. "What happens if you say no?" I asked. They hinted we'd be deprioritized, slower delivery times, higher penalties. Devin was on the call too, said it was standardizing modern logistics strategy. I knew then, this wasn't about streamlining. This was a squeeze. They weren't running the business better. They were trying to inflate margins before a sale. That night, I drove to Charlie's place with a bottle of cheap scotch and 2 cigars. "I think Lucas and Devin are trying to flip the company," I said, as we sat on his porch. He raised an eyebrow. "Sell?" "Private equity, maybe. Or a merger with a bigger outfit. Something with immediate payout. That's the only reason you strong-arm loyal clients, restructure routes, and change payment terms." Charlie puffed the cigar slowly. "You got proof?" "Not yet," I said, "but I've got a feeling." I didn't have proof, but I had instincts. And over the next few days, those instincts were confirmed by what started showing up in my inbox. An anonymous tip about a storage unit Lucas had leased under a shell name turned out to be where they were stashing old hardware they'd written off as damaged. Good trucks, computers, parts, everything that could be sold as lost to cook the books. Another tip from a supplier in Nebraska. Lucas had renegotiated contracts under terms that guaranteed supply shortages, forcing emergency payouts to cover inventory gaps. The penalties were built in, intentional. And then came the kicker. A forwarded email chain from a former administrative assistant at Grant & Sons, one Lucas had fired 3 weeks ago. She didn't say much, just sent the chain and wrote, "He thought I wouldn't notice, but you taught me better." The email showed a communications trail between Lucas, Devin, and a third party, a private equity group based out of Atlanta. They were discussing preliminary valuation figures, not hypotheticals, actual numbers, a deal in progress. I sat in my truck with the engine running for a long time after reading that. Lucas wasn't just restructuring, he was gutting the company for a buyout. And my father either didn't know or didn't care. But I did. And unlike them, I didn't need backroom deals or pressure tactics to take action. I had drivers, I had clients, and now I had truth. The question wasn't whether I could stop them, it was how loud the truth would be when it landed, and whether I'd give them the chance to hear it in private, or let the entire industry hear it first. I knew I couldn't take them down with noise, not yet. This wasn't a bar fight, it was a boardroom ambush, the kind where evidence mattered more than emotion, and timing was everything. I started with the assistant who'd sent me the emails, Carly. She met me at a diner off Route 10, nervous but firm. She slid her phone across the table. "I saved everything before he fired me," she said. "I knew he was up to something, and I figured you'd care." She was right. The files were gold. Internal memos, draft proposals, meeting invites with titles like Q3 Asset Consolidation Strategy and PE Exit Preparation. I cross-referenced the email threads with the clients Charlie and I had already spoken to. It all lined up. Lucas and Devin were consolidating contracts, inflating value on paper, and setting up an acquisition pitch for a Q4 close. They weren't building the company, they were staging it for sale. Once I had the documents, I called Marcus, my old college roommate, now a forensic accountant with a specialty in private equity deals. "You're sure you want to go this route?" he asked. "I'm not trying to burn it down," I said. "Just expose the rot before it spreads." He reviewed everything in 2 days. His summary was sharp and damning. If they succeed, half their drivers will be let go within 6 months, and the buyer will strip the assets and dissolve operations within a year. You've got maybe 6 weeks to stop it. 6 weeks. That's all I had. So I mapped my steps. Step 1, protect my clients. I reached out to every long-term partner who hadn't signed exclusivity clauses yet, told them what I suspected without revealing too much, promised them continuity and personal accountability. Several jumped immediately to Iron Spur Freight. Step 2, re-recruit, quietly, selectively. Drivers, dispatchers, warehouse leads, people who believed in the business the way it used to be. I didn't offer better pay. I offered purpose, stability, respect. That was enough. Step 3, prepare the truth. I compiled everything Marcus uncovered into a digital folder with timestamps, signatures, and a written analysis. Then I made 4 encrypted copies, one with me, one with Marcus, one with a journalist contact I trusted, and one with a lawyer. Not because I planned to leak it, but because I knew what people like Devin did when cornered, and I wasn't going to leave any door unguarded. Finally, I paid a visit to my father. I found him in his home office, half asleep in his chair, Old Western playing on mute. He looked smaller than I remembered, frail even. "I know what Lucas is doing," I said, without preamble. "I have the documents." He looked at me for a long time, didn't argue, just sighed. "Maybe it's time," he said softly. "For what?" I asked. "For change. I don't have the energy to fight anymore." I felt something bitter tighten in my chest. "You don't have to fight, you just have to choose." He didn't reply, just turned back to the screen. I left without another word, because I wasn't there for his blessing. I was there to see whether he was still a father or just another shareholder watching his legacy crumble. And now I had my answer. This wouldn't be a family reckoning. It would be a professional one. And I was ready. I didn't make a public statement, didn't schedule press, didn't post a dramatic message on LinkedIn. That wasn't my way. Instead, I started by letting Lucas feel safe. The more he believed I was gone, the bolder he got. Charlie kept an ear to the ground at Grant & Sons. Said Lucas was walking around like he owned the place, hosting private meetings with out-of-town suits, clearing out old inventory to make room for new assets, even letting Devin run point on negotiations, which was something my father never would have allowed in his prime. It was exactly what I needed. While Lucas performed his little empire act, I doubled down on real business. In 4 weeks, Iron Spur Freight picked up 6 former clients. 5 drivers jumped ship, and 2 mechanics followed. I didn't recruit them. They came on their own. Word travels fast in this industry. But what really sealed the shift was a simple flyer. Black and white, nothing flashy. Tired of waiting for leadership to remember your name? Iron Spur is hiring. Call Tom. I posted it on a bulletin board outside the old Route 15 truck stop, a place every veteran hauler in the state passed through. I got 28 calls in 3 days. While I rebuilt, Marcus finalized the report. Everything was clean, verified, watertight. We even had proof of preliminary buyout negotiations and clauses that would dissolve nearly half the regional team within 6 months of a sale. I didn't send it to my father. I sent it to 3 board members, people who'd worked with me since my first day as operations manager, people who'd asked me to step in when Dad had his stroke. They called me within hours. "This is serious, Tom." "Yeah, and if the board doesn't act, it's going public." They asked for 48 hours. I gave them 24. That same evening, Charlie told me Lucas had scheduled a private board meeting for the following Friday. He was preparing the pitch, positioning the sale as the only option to secure long-term viability. But he didn't know what was waiting in the room. Friday morning, I shaved, put on my Navy suit, and walked into the Grant & Sons building for the first time in 5 weeks. Nobody stopped me. At the top floor, I didn't knock. I walked right into the conference room mid-presentation. Lucas froze. "Tom, this is a private. Sit down," I said calmly. One of the board members gestured for me to continue. I handed out copies of Marcus's report, one by one. No commentary. Just paper and silence. They read in shifts, some frowning, others visibly stunned. My father was there too, silent, pale. When they finished, I stood at the head of the table. "You've all worked too long and too hard to have your careers end as a footnote in someone else's investment portfolio. I don't care if you like me. I don't care if you think I'm bitter. But I care about this company, and I won't let it be gutted by men who see it as a short-term asset flip." Lucas tried to speak. "This is slander." "No, this is evidence." The chairman called for an immediate vote, motioned to suspend Devin's contract and freeze all acquisition talks. Unanimous. Lucas stood there, jaw clenched, eyes wide. "This isn't over," he muttered. I stepped closer. "For you?" It just started. And just like that, I was back in the room. Not because I demanded it, because I'd earned it. Lucas didn't show up the next day, nor the day after. Devin tried to come in Monday morning, briefcase in hand, but security had already been instructed to revoke his access. According to Charlie, he stood outside the building for 5 full minutes before finally turning around and walking off without a word. I didn't smile when I heard that, but I won't lie. I felt something like justice warming in my chest. The board moved quickly. They appointed an interim transition committee to audit recent vendor contracts and operational restructurings. When they brought me in to consult, I refused the title. I wasn't interested in taking back a throne. I just wanted to make sure the foundation was still standing. And it was, but barely. The damage Lucas had done in 6 weeks was deeper than expected. 3 long-term clients had walked due to price gouging. 2 critical contracts had been rerouted through third-party subcontractors, companies Devin had personal connections to. And worst of all, the books were a mess. Overinflated asset valuations, mysterious consultant fees, software subscriptions nobody authorized. It was a full-on gut job wrapped in slick presentations and digital dashboards. But the rot was visible now. What surprised me most, though, was my father. He requested to meet in private one afternoon, not at the office, at the old truck yard where it all began. I found him leaning against one of the first rigs we ever bought. Rusted hood, bald tires, still had my initials carved under the driver's seat from when I was a teenager. He didn't look angry, just tired. He said, "I didn't want this." I said, "Didn't want what?" "For it to be you versus him." I crossed my arms. I said, "You chose to look away." He nodded. I did. We stood there a long time, not speaking, just listening to the wind pass through chain-link fence and steel frames. Finally, he said, "You were always the builder. Lucas, he just wanted the reward." I didn't reply, not because I disagreed, but because it was the first time he'd ever said it out loud. A week later, the board made it official. Lucas was removed from all leadership roles. His shares were frozen pending review of fiduciary breach. Devin was gone under quiet investigation for financial misconduct. And me? They offered the CEO role. I declined. "I'm not here to fix this by becoming what broke it," I told them. "I'll advise, I'll support, but this company needs a new voice, one that's not bound by bloodlines and legacy pride." Instead, I proposed a new leadership model, merit-based, operational leaders from every department, not just the C-suite, accountability built into every level. And they agreed. But even as the company began to heal, something lingered. Lucas. I hadn't seen or spoken to him since that day in the boardroom. Word was he'd holed up in Chicago, trying to salvage reputation, maybe start something new. I didn't know, I didn't care. Until the call came. From his number. I didn't answer. Then the voicemail. "Tom, I messed up. I see that now. You were right. About everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I just needed you to know I'm sorry." I listened to it twice. Not because I believed him, but because part of me needed to hear it. Some betrayals you don't forget. Some you don't forgive. But sometimes hearing the apology is enough. Not for them, but for you. To know they finally saw the damage and knew who'd built the bridge they tried to burn. The board made their announcement the following Monday. Simple, press release. Direct, unapologetic. Effective immediately, Lucas Grant has been removed from all executive functions at Grant & Sons due to violations of internal governance and fiduciary integrity. Further investigations are ongoing. No spin, no sugarcoating. The industry took notice. Articles popped up in trade publications within hours. Rumors spread across shipping forums. Former partners started calling, some to express support, others to renegotiate terms now that Lucas was out. A few just wanted to know if the company still had a future. It did. The clients we'd nearly lost came back, slowly but deliberately. One of them said it best in an email. "We never wanted to leave, we just didn't recognize the company anymore." Within 2 weeks, 3 new contracts were signed under the restructured leadership team. Morale inside the yards was rising again. Dispatchers weren't worried about losing routes. Drivers weren't afraid of being replaced by automated systems and spreadsheets. We were rebuilding, and this time from the inside out. But the justice didn't stop at the company line. Devin was facing formal charges. Turns out, one of the shell companies he used for consulting on the sale was tied to a private account in Nevada under his wife's name. The money trail was thin, but Marcus had already passed it to the state attorney's office. If convicted, Devin would be disbarred from corporate advisory work permanently. And Lucas? The board filed a civil suit against him, citing intentional misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, and internal sabotage. His shares were frozen, assets under review. He tried to negotiate, of course, tried to make it right, but the door had closed. And this time it wasn't me who slammed it shut. It was the very people he thought he'd manipulated into silence. I didn't attend the court hearings, didn't make statements. I stayed at the yards, worked alongside the new operations director, trained a few new hires on myself. Even fixed up one of the old rigs myself, the one Dad used to drive when he was still sharp. The only time I saw my father after everything was in the garage behind his house. He was changing the oil on a lawnmower, moving slow but steady. We didn't speak about Lucas, or the company, or the fallout. He just looked up and said, "It's running smoother than it has in years." I knew he wasn't talking about the mower. And maybe that was all the closure we'd get. As for Iron Spur Freight, my little side project meant to be a safety net, it was now a full operation. 10 trucks, 12 drivers, and growing. We stayed small on purpose, flexible, human. Some nights, I'd sit in the office trailer, lights low, listening to the sound of engines rolling in and out of the lot. And I'd think about what Lucas had said in that voicemail. I messed up. I don't expect forgiveness. He was right. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. But consequences, those came served cold. And maybe, just maybe, that's what finally taught him the difference between legacy and leverage. He tried to trade trust for cash and lost both. It's strange how quiet the world gets after a storm passes. You'd think there'd be a celebration, some victorious return, people clapping you on the back, calling you a hero. But life doesn't work like that, especially not in business, especially not in families. After everything settled, I found myself back on the road, not running away, just moving. It's what I've always done when things shift. The hum of tires, the long stretch of highway, the rhythm of motion. It clears the mind better than any office ever could. I stopped at a diner in Nebraska I hadn't seen in over a decade. Same stools, same waitress, same chipped ceramic mugs. As I sipped my coffee, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Lucas, not at my father, not even at myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to protect someone else's idea of success. I was living mine. Iron Spur grew steadily. We didn't chase contracts. We earned them. One delivery at a time. One promise kept. Clients told us we reminded them of how business used to feel. Personal. Accountable. Human. Funny how going backward a little was exactly what moved us forward. Grant and Sons survived too. They still carry the family name, and part of me is glad. Not for legacy's sake, but for the men and women who still punch the clock there. They deserve stability. They deserve leadership that listens. And from what I hear, the new operations team is doing just that. My father eventually called. not to apologize, just to talk. He asked how things were at Ironspur. I told him we were holding steady, and he sounded proud. Not in a loud way, just quiet approval, the kind that says more than words do. As for Lucas, I haven't heard from him again. I don't expect to. I imagine he's somewhere trying to start over, wearing a different name, pitching a new vision. But he'll always carry what happened. Not because of me, but because of what he almost destroyed. He learned that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And me? I learned something too. That power isn't about titles or signatures. It's not about who owns the company or whose name is on the door. It's about how you show up when everything you built gets stripped away. I didn't win by fighting louder. I won by standing still. When everyone else rushed toward chaos, I won by staying honest when lies would have been easier. And I won by walking away, long enough for them to realize what they lost, then returning, not to take revenge, but to restore what mattered. Some days I sit on the hood of one of our trucks at sunset, watching the last light bounce off the metal, and I think about the road that brought me here. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't straight. But it was mine. And in the end, that's the only route worth taking.